that the Côte de Beaune? I hope it's the Côte de Beaune behind you, Mark.
It's the Côte de Beaune, John.
Of course, that's
the center of the universe.
Yes, that would be rather appropriate, and a good choice there. And thank you for joining us. Great to see you as always. How are you?
I'm great. Yeah, just you know, this my wine collection, my personal cellar that's been built up over the years, which you know extremely well. My wife has always asked me over the years, you know, what are we saving up all this wine for? And it never occurred to me to say we're saving it up for a pandemic.
Yeah. Well, you know, I know you're covered. That's for sure. One way or another. And you know, great to have you. I've been tasting these wines for over an hour, and I've been having a good time with it, going back and forth. I love your wines very much, and I think you're one of the great new things in Burgundy. I mean, even though it's you're relatively new to this, this is a domain with a very storied estate. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you became a Burgundian in the first place.
Well, I've been a Burgundian at heart for a long time. I've been a passionate wine collector since I was old enough to buy wine, and built up a pretty significant collection over the years, and had an opportunity to drink all the great wines and go to all the great tastings around the world, including many that have been put on by Acker, top 100s, on and on and on. And in 2005, I really wanted to learn more about the winemaking process. At that time, the Hospice de Beaune made it possible for a private person to buy an individual barrel because they had turned over their auction to Christie's, and Christie's was leveraging their relationship with buyers around the world. And so I bought my first barrel in 2005, but I didn't want to just give it to a negociant and say, okay, I'll come back in a year and get bottles. I want to be able to participate in that process. And in my former career, we had a company in Europe that I was on the board of, and I was there 4 times a year. So I was in Burgundy working on élevage in the 2005 vintage, and then I bought barrels again in 2006, 7, 8, and 9. And in 2010, I had the opportunity to work the harvest for the first time. And I was really trying to work my way backwards from élevage all the way into the vineyard stages, and really wanted to get into a position where it would be possible to be even more involved. And on the very last afternoon of the last day that I was working the harvest in 2010, I was approached by Pierre Merget, who's now my partner in Burgundy. He asked me if I was interested in buying a vineyard. That was something that I didn't even think was possible. Of course I said yes. And the opportunity to buy the vineyard happened to be the Clos de la Chapelle monopole, which is our flagship vineyard. It's right in the heart of Burgundy. And it really is a fantastic expression.
This was the vineyard without being the whole domain at first. It was just the land. It was a land deal.
It was originally just, the original idea was just to be buying the Clos de la Chapelle vineyard. But as those of us who spend a lot of time in Burgundy, there's always these twists and turns in the deal. And then it ended up being 2 more vineyards. It ended up being the Acker vineyard, Premier and Grand Cru just across the road. It ended up being the Pomerleau vineyard. And very shortly after that, it was 2 more vineyards in Beaune. And so very, very quickly, we ended up with 11 appellations, all Premier Cru and Grand Cru, all in the Côte de Beaune. We farm about 4 hectares, so about 10 acres, about 1 acre per appellation. And we have really an incredible terroirs up and down the Côte de Beaune.
Let me interrupt you for a second. Sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
I just want to get clarity myself.
No.
So were all these vineyards? I mean, the Clos de la Chapelle domain was owned by one of the Louis Boyau.
It was owned by Louis Boyau. His family had owned the vineyard along with the Le Chenlen vineyard and the Acker vineyard. And owned those in his family for generations. But the Clos de la Chapelle vineyard dates back to the 13th century. There have only ever been 4 owners of the Clos de la Chapelle vineyard in 700 years. And his
Wow.
family bought it in 1858 from
Oh
the
my God.
patriarch, negociant. And so his family had owned it for 150 years. And due to a bunch of inheritance issues, which the French have lots of challenges with, he was no longer able to keep it in the family.
Right, right. So that means, so some of the other vineyards you acquired from different opportunities, and you folded them into the Clos de la Chapelle.
That's right.
Winery domain.
Yeah. The Carré family owned the Taille-Pierre vineyard, which we're tasting tonight. The Taille-Pierre vineyard that we have is right in between de Monti and d'Angeville's vineyard. So it's a fantastic parcel of Taille-Pierre. The Carré family had owned that Taille-Pierre for generations.
That sounds like a great location. So how does an American sneak in between these two iconic French Volnay families and get that property?
Well, it was a little bit of sort of behind the curtain, behind the scenes work. French partners I have were very sensitive to these issues. So they did some very clever financial engineering that didn't have it exactly looking like it was an American that was behind the whole situation. We had to let a certain amount of time go by before I came out from behind the curtain.
Right. They said so. It was. They said Mark O'Connell. No, it's Mark O'Connell.
That's exactly right. Yes, with a C. Mark with a C.
Well, that's good. I mean, you know, how many Americans are making wine in Burgundy today?
You know, it depends on sort of how you define making wine. As far as I know, I'm the only winemaker and landowner, somebody who is taking the grapes, owns the land, has a domain, harvesting, and actually is a winemaker. I went back to UC Davis and got my enology certification about 5 years ago. And from that definition, I think I'm the only one left. Alex Gamble has sold and Blair Pathel has sold, but there's other Americans that own vineyards, of course. Michael Baum owns Château de Pomar, for example. So there's other Americans that are involved, and there's some Americans that also do some negociant work. But there's not many of us, just really a handful.
Right, right. And I bet probably if you sold today, it'd be a nice profit based on 10 years. The way prices have gone up in Burgundy for land, it's kind of crazy.
Land prices are just absolutely insane, and you know, it's a little bit like owning an NBA franchise or NFL franchise. I mean, they're not making any more Grand Cru Burgundy. So if you're not making any more Grand Cru Burgundy, there's the sky's the limit as far as a lot of the prices are concerned.
And so what are you doing right now? I mean, obviously you can't go to France. You have a good team there in charge and taking care of the vineyards and doing the proper management. And what's going on at the domain?
Well, fortunately, the vineyard work is considered essential work, so we're able to keep that going. I'm on the phone almost every day with the domain, talking about what's happening with the team and what's going on. We happily have escaped a couple of rounds of frost already this year. Vegetation is advanced this year more than in the last 80 years. We have a very, very early spring happening. So that puts a lot of pressure on us to make sure that we're keeping up with the vineyard work because it's happening a lot sooner than we would normally expect. We've bottled our 2018, so we were able to get that done before everything got closed down. So we don't have a tremendous amount going on in the winery at the moment, other than tending to the 2019s, which are incredibly stable wines. And again, we're very happy about that. We don't have to do a lot in the élevage process just because those wines are very happy just kind of snoozing through the coronavirus right now.
Okay, great. So we have three wines that we're going to taste tonight from the 2016 vintage, a phenomenal vintage, very highly regarded and an amazing vintage. Talk to us about 2016. In fact, in the Côte de Beaune, there was like nothing made, right? I mean, it's like a tiny tiny vintage because you had the hail and the frost. You had the locusts and, you know, the vipers and everything, right? Go wrong that year.
Yeah, the main thing was the frost. I mean, the frost that we had at the very last part of April was just devastating. It was the worst frost since 1981. And we lost almost 50% of the crop in Volnay, which actually, to be perfectly blunt, was not as bad as some of our neighbors. We did a little bit better in Pomar, but Pernon was terrible. But in Volnay, the three wines that we're tasting tonight were about 50% below what a normal crop would be. So that really set us on our back foot. But then we also had the worst. I was just going to say we just had the worst mildew maybe in the history of Burgundy. And so we thought up until June, we thought it was going to be a horrible, horrible vintage. But I like to say that vintages are like NBA basketball games. I mean, it all comes down to the fourth quarter. I mean, it doesn't even matter almost, you know, what it's like in the first 3 quarters of the year. And July, August, and September were spectacular. It was a spectacular 3 months. And so the wines just ended up really, really glorious. And in some ways, I think these wines are better in some ways than even 2015, which of course is a great, great vintage.
So I'm sensing you're an NBA lover. So when you sell your vineyards in Burgundy, which NBA team are you going to buy?
Not the Knicks.
Please, can you please buy the Knicks? It's been really hard for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's, you know, so 2016, I mean, the wines are so fresh. They're so great. I mean, so talk to us about these 3 vineyards. You have Carrel, you have Clos de la Chapelle, and you have Taille, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing that's wonderful about these 3 vineyards is that they're all right in the center of the commune, of the village of Volnay. If you're looking at the commune from east to west, which is the kind of the way we normally look at a Burgundy map. So when we look east to west, they're right in the center, and Acker is down at the bottom of the slope. And it's almost got a 50-50 ratio between clay and limestone. And then we go up the slope and we go up almost 200, 250 feet to the top to Taille, and the Côte de la Chapelle is in the middle. And we come to an almost 2-to-1 ratio between limestone and clay. And so when you taste these wines, you're literally just walking up the hill and getting more and more limestone and less clay. And what I find as I taste through these 3 is that the Acker is fleshier, it's fruitier, it's a little bit more aromatic. The Côte de la Chapelle is a little more refined, a little bit more distinctive mid-palate. And then the Taille is a darker, deeper, more brooding, much more highly textured wine. And that's true almost every year among these 3 wines. And so they really show what the difference is in just a couple of hundred yards, literally from the bottom to the top.
You just stole my comments on the wines here. But what do you know something about wine, Mark? I mean, that was a very accurate description. I mean,
fortunately, I get to drink these a lot.
Right. Well, I mean, Mark does. I mean, he mentioned it in the beginning. I mean, I've known Mark for probably 20 years, somewhere close to that, and we've been drinking a lot of wines together. I mean, he used to come to a lot of great events that we did. We did the legendary Top 100 weekend back in 2004 for sure. And he's a true connoisseur and a true bon vivant. I mean, and a foodie who travels the world to eat, or has traveled the world to eat. Now he's got to go to Burgundy, but they eat pretty good in Burgundy as well. A little heavy, on the food, compared to some of the other regions. But, I mean, so he really loved wine. He knew wine. And, he kind of decided to give up his normal life and pursue the Pinot Noir grape. And but you make one white wine as well, right? Which is
we have 3 white wine vineyards. We have Courtauld Charlemagne, which is we have a fantastic parcel on the Pernon Vergelès side, so it's on the cooler side, very steely, iconic kind of linear style. We have a Beaune white called Réversé Blanc, and we have Pernon Vergelès Souffletis, a tiny parcel of Premier Cru Souffletis, which is also an incredible value. So we have three whites and 8 reds.
So you sell the whites, or you know, or all three? I mean, I've seen the Corton Charlemagne, but I haven't seen the others.
Yeah. So again, all of our parcels are pretty small. So we typically have about 100 cases of each wine each year, just to kind of do it in round figures. And the Réversé Blanc, because it's kind of an entry-level price point, even though it's a Premier Cru wine, really goes to restaurants by the glass. There's just almost no retail on that wine. In New York, for example, we've been by the glass pour at Blue Hill for years. We've been by the glass pour at Brooklyn Fair with that wine. So it goes pretty quickly on the restaurant scene. And the Pernon Vergelès Souffletis, we only make a couple of barrels, and that goes to a couple of just a couple locations, mostly in Europe.
So the Volnays are definitely your signature kind of red wines, but you also have Beaune and Pommard, and is that it, or are there more?
Corton. We have 2 Pommards. We've got Grand Epinot, which of course has been nominated to be promoted to a Grand Cru, a really fantastic terroir, and we have really one of my favorite wines is our Pommard Les Chenelaines. It's right on the border of Pommard and Volnay. It has vines that were planted in 1930. So Vieille Vigne, 90-year-old vines, and it makes an incredible, very distinctive wine. And we have two Beaune wines, Champiment and Les Terrones, and then we have a Grand Cru Corton-Bresson. We have a tiny parcel of Corton-Bresson, which is a great parcel next to Jacques Prieur and Domaine de la Romanée-Conti.
Some good neighbors to have.
Yeah, yeah.
And so of all these, of all the wines, obviously you really have kind of become, you know, everywhere in the Côte de Beaune. And what was the first year that you actually released Clos de la Chapelle?
Well, 2010 was when we bought the vineyard, and we purchased the barrels. So we didn't make the wine in 2010, but we did the élevage. 2011 was the first year that we actually made the wine. So we've had 10 vintages of making the wine. 2020 will be our 11th vintage.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. That's great. You know, I'd like to open it up to, you know, maybe a few questions or comments from some of the crowd. If we did a session Monday night with Martine, but nobody got to say anything because Martine was very full of a lot of great information and such. If there are any questions from Mark or anybody might have one, I might call on some of those guys that I know, some of my buddies like Jonathan. How you doing, Jonathan, tonight? You know, we could call on.
You're live.
Hello, you're live.
You just woke me up. That was great. I wasn't expecting any questions, but Mark, I must apologize. I was supposed to do you guys did a dinner with, I think, Mark a few years ago, right?
A few months ago.
How long ago?
I want to say it was October.
Yeah.
We were at Café Beloud a few months ago in October.
Yeah, I was supposed to be there. Unfortunately, I missed it.
You know, they kind of like time just kind of loses everything, right?
It does. Yeah, I was supposed to be there for that one. Unfortunately, I missed it. But it's glad to see you on board, and I'm glad to be here. I'm actually drinking 2010 Late Corton tonight from Bouchard.
From Mark or from somebody else?
No, from Bouchard. He said he makes 100 cases. Where am I going to get that wine?
Well, you know, you can try Acker, Maryland Condit, Jonathan. You know.
You have the phone number for those folks?
You know, there's actually quite a selection of Clos de la Chapelle wines. They're very closely, but we'll talk tomorrow about that. But how's the Bouchard Corton? Just to get a little different perspective on
well, I'm a big Corton fan, so whether it's Le Corton, Clos de Corton. I mean, and especially in 2010, it's a vintage of Corton that's drinking very well right now. So I'm drinking them, and after this quarantine's over, I'm gonna have to buy some more because it's all gonna be gone.
Yeah. Well, Mark, you need to get some Clos de la Chapelle Corton because I mean, it's a great one. I don't know if we have any or not, but his Corton Bresson. You make 2 Cortons, Mark, or just?
Just the Bresson, yeah. We
Yeah.
we just make the Bresson, and yeah, a very small quantity. John gets a really good allocation. He probably gets as much Bresson as anybody, but it goes pretty quick.
All right, I'm placing my order right now.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. Great to see you as always. Appreciate you coming on live. Let me say hi to maybe Alan. Alan's one of the I would call him the guys I know that I've drunk with and hung out at the table, and I know drink very well. Alan, how are you?
Great. Drinking a 2010 Domaine Clos de la Chapelle. First vintage, Mark.
Yes. Alan, I
It's
think you have
interesting
more. I think you have more of the 2010 Clos de la Chapelle than I do.
I know you took over in the fall, right?
That's right. Yeah, we signed the contract in October and finalized in November. Took possession of the barrels at the end of November.
Yeah, I love the 2010 vintage in general. So what's interesting about this is I believe the Ancurel, but you're the only person I think who labels it just Ancurel, because most people label it Ancurel Sud de la Chapelle.
Yes, well, actually, Etienne de Monti labels it Ancurel as well.
Okay.
And his parcel is next to ours. And we originally labeled it Sud de la Chapelle, which is the more common name. But frankly, after one vintage, everybody was so confused, particularly, the Psalms that would go to try to pull, and they'd see Clos de la Chapelle and Sud de la Chapelle, and it was Domaine Clos de la Chapelle, and everything got very confused to everybody. So happily, I talked to Etienne, and I was able to find, that sort of a common use practice had been for many years to call it Ancurel, and that was perfectly acceptable labeling. So that's why we've gone with that nomenclature.
It's a great wine right now.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's we don't have any more to sell at the Domaine. There's some restaurants in Beaune that that have pretty much the rest of the stock, unless Alan, you have your stash that you're willing to share.
I only have 1 case left, so.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a lot because again, it's a very small parcel.
Is that the Carrel or the Clos de la Chapelle? I lost track while refilling my glass there for a second. Apologies.
It's Carrel, but that's the one vintage he labeled it Carrel Sud de la Chapelle.
Ah, right. Okay. That is a trivia question that only you, Alan, might be able to answer. But thank you, and great to have you drinking on point here with some of Mark's wines. Cheers, great to see you. And thank you. So, Mark, tell us, have you do you feel well received in Burgundy? Do you feel like they have welcomed you, or do you get a lot of mean looks at the boulangerie every morning?
That's a good question. I think my general answer to that is that I think that the acceptance has been pretty much what you might expect in any rural community in the world that has a very proud tradition and history when an outsider comes in. Particularly if you have a rural community that has a proud tradition that they really don't want to change very much. They just really want things to stay the way they are, even though a lot of them recognize that that's not the case. So I would say about a third of the people really, would rather me not be there. And it's not because I'm an American, frankly. I could be from Paris. That might even be worse if I were from Paris. And a third of the people actually have been incredibly generous. They've gone out of their way. They've contacted me to see not only could they provide any support or assistance, but they've actually offered their advice unsolicited, which has been extremely helpful. And then a third of the people right in the middle give what, you know, we all know is sort of the Gallic shrug of, okay, well, whatever. And they just are happy to go along with whatever. You know, we've invested a tremendous amount in the community. We changed all the farming practices to biodynamic and organic, which is very expensive, as you all know, and is obviously much better for the environment. And we've invested a lot of money in various charity events in the community. So we've really been good stewards and probably have spent more money helping to build up the reputation of Burgundy as anybody who would do so if they were a local owner. So in that sense, I feel like both after 10 years, people have really recognized that, and they appreciate the fact that they really are getting the kind of support that they would want from any local owner.
Okay, so how obviously this year's a little different for everybody, but normally, how often do you live in Burgundy versus the U.S.?
In a typical year, I go over almost every other month, and I will go over for either a week, 10 days at a time. Of course, at harvest, I'm there for 5 weeks from pretty much the beginning all the way to the end, and that sort of every other month provides the right kind of rhythm for me to be in the middle of the vineyard activities, the commercial activities, and the winemaking activities.
That's great. That's great. So the 2016s, we have the three wines. We also have a 2011. Talk to us about 2011. So that was your first year, pretty much.
Yeah, and so this is a really good contrast, 11 versus 16. These two wines really couldn't be more different, I think, given the same terroir. First of all, 11 was a very hot vintage. It was a very early harvest. We harvested at the end of August. 16, unusual for recent vintages, was a late harvest for us. It was the end of September. So we have an early versus late harvest. Also, the winemaking style is very different. 2011 is totally destemmed. And I started doing more whole cluster after the first couple of years. I wanted to destem the first few years to make sure I really understood the terroir, and didn't want to do whole cluster until I understood more about what the terroirs were about. And so we have about 50% whole cluster in the 2016. So that's another big difference. And then we have a difference between the fact that the yield, while down a little bit in 11, is significantly down in 16. So we have, even though it's the same terroir, we have different winemaking techniques, very different vintages. And so that really is a good, I think, study in contrast in and of itself.
Can
The 11,
the
yeah,
question
sure.
that you taste these wines in? I know John's already gone through them a few times and gone back and forth, but you talked a little bit about the terroir to start with. So for the horizontal of the 16s, in which order would you taste them?
So I always taste the Acker first, because it, without being pejorative at all, it's the simplest wine. It's the most straightforward wine. It's a really wonderful introduction to Volnay. And I think if people don't know Volnay, before we start talking about the intricacies and the complexities, I like people to try the Acker just to say, okay, this is what Volnay is all about. And then I always go to the Clos de la Chapelle, which is a little more up the slope, again, a little more refined, and then finish with the Type A, which is more powerful. And a lot of people go back and forth about which they think is better, the Clos de la Chapelle or the Type A, and it's really a little bit of a sort of a Lafite versus Latour kind of comparison, where you've got sort of the power of the Type A versus the refinement of the Clos de la Chapelle.
Yeah, these are three exquisite Volnays, and I mean, the wines now, I mean, you could see, you really, compared to the 11, obviously everybody doesn't have all four wines here. 11 is a beautiful wine, nice wine, not as great a finish as 16, but I mean, the 16s, all three of them are singing. So I mean, I opened them up pretty much like 3 hours ago, and just didn't decant them, just left them open. You know, started like nipping at them at 7 o'clock. You know, and just going through them one by one, slowly and surely, and they are all like really humming right now. And yeah, the Corel has, you know, at first it was, you know, the definition kind of came secondary. First, it was just kind of like open. It was like, okay, this is the easy wine, right? But then it really started to like, you know, show its strength with some time in the glass. And I think the Clos de la Chapelle was like that miscongeniality, just like delivers everything right down the middle, just like really nice. And then you're right, the Tapier is like the powerhouse, the brooder, just like the deep, dark, you know, serious, like you have to have like a good night's sleep to like talk to the Tapier, you know, otherwise, you know, it might just, you know, be a conversation you're not ready for.
Yeah. Yeah, and you opened them an hour ahead because you wanted to make sure that we didn't have a cork bottle, right? Because they're not corked.
None of them are corked, thankfully. You know, that wasn't really. I mean, I opened them up actually, 2.5 hours ahead because you know I need a drink earlier than 8 p.m. generally in my day. So kind of like it. It was more of a It was kind of half personal, half professional decision there to like get the wine open and ready, and also I needed a drink, and you know, so like that's kind of how it works out in the Cape Wine house.
Yeah, well, it's funny because these virtual wine tastings, you know, I try to approach them like you know, a regular in-person tasting. I said, oh, I got to go down and open up the wine, make sure nothing's corked. It's like, who's going to know except me?
Yeah, nothing is corked, and all these wines. I mean, these 3 wines. I mean, they're all Premier Cru, right? Volnay technically has no Grand Crus. Only Corton has the Grand Crus, right?
That's right. Yeah, Premier. So that's an interesting point, John. So the village of Volnay is just like chock full of incredible terroirs. There is no Grand Cru, but there's more acreage or hectares of Premier Cru in Volnay than there is village, which you really don't find anywhere else in the Côte de Beaune. You know, it's unusual to have a commune like that. And the Clos de la Chapelle, you know, the Clos, you know, is somewhat of a unusual, or not unusual, but not that common, you find. But in Volnay, it isn't. I think there are 14 Clos in Volnay, Premier Cru Clos.
Right, but there's only one Clos de la Chapelle, and that's yours because it is monopole, right?
Monopole. That's right. That's right.
Only one owns it. You cannot get any. That's very. How many monopoles are there in Burgundy? You must know this fact. Not to put you on the spot.
I don't. I think there are about 30. 30 monopoles. 30 monopole clos. It's either 30 monopoles or 30 monopoles that are also closed. But there's I mean, at the Grand Cru level, of course, there's a lot of monopoles. A lot more anyway. There's with La Tâche and La Grande Rue and La Romanée and
4 Grand Cru monopoles.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find the general number for the rest of the Côte.
Okay. All right. Well, I can say that I guarantee you that probably no other monopole you could acquire for 70 or 80 bucks the bottle, unlike Mark's wines, which have been very reasonable. I mean, all these wines are like basically between $60 and $80 a bottle, which may be expensive, you know, in everyday world, but for Burgundy, that's, you know, and for Burgundy of this quality, that's like very cheap, actually.
Yeah, we've kept our prices the same since 2012. We've not raised our prices once since then.
I think you're the only one, Mark. I mean, you know, maybe you need a little French something or other to help you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, frankly, you know,
that's great.
The reason it's been sort of very deliberate because the wines sell out every year, and we could, you know, obviously raise prices because the wines do sell out every year. But, you know, as a collector, you know, I didn't really appreciate very much when I would find out about a new wine that I didn't know about that I thought was great, and I'd get excited about it, and then I'd find as soon as I learned about it and got excited about it, the price went up all the time. And we really want to make sure that people who buy our wines every year enjoy them and have the opportunity to get experience with them. You know, and when we do raise price, which obviously we'll have to do at some point, you know, we've built up a loyal following of people who understand what the value is. And I think that can only be done if people have more than 1 or 2 years of experience with it. If you've got 4 or 5 or 6 years, then if somebody comes and says, hey, I've been doing a good job for 5 or 6 years, I'd like to raise the price, I think it becomes much more accepted.
Well, I think, you know, you've definitely done that. And, you know, kudos to you for being able to kind of keep the, you know, the quality at a high level and the price at a low level, because that's becoming rarer and rarer in Burgundy today. So, you know, thank you for that. And, you know, we do have a bunch of wines from Mark available in inventory. We do work with them very closely. And, you know, please contact us if you want any. So, does anybody have any questions for Mark, or any other questions to the crowd? Or maybe I'll call on.
We had one question about how Mark, as a somewhat independent, smaller winery in Burgundy and an American no less, imports his wine to the US, whether he uses kind of an established importer or imports the wine himself.
That's a very good question. So the fact that I am obviously based in the U.S. and I do have a fair amount of familiarity with the U.S. Market before I got involved on the winemaking side, I'm essentially act as my own national importer, if you will, although I don't actually bring the wine in myself. I work with individual import companies at regional level. So we have a fantastic importer in the New York, New Jersey market, Banville Wine Merchants, and they also represent us in the DC market, Northern Virginia. And then we have distributors in individual markets like Texas and California, in New Orleans. So we're Missouri. We've got a terrific importer in Missouri. Amazing amount of Burgundies sold in Missouri. Had really no idea until I got involved with Pinnacle. So again, we have individual ones that I work with and help coordinate all the sales and marketing efforts. So that seems to work reasonably well. That also helps keep the price down because we're bringing wine in without that extra layer of a national importer.
Do you have distribution outside of the U.S.? I mean, I know you have distribution in Hong Kong.
Yeah, we actually
Asia, actually. Thank you very much for that, Mark. But what about the rest of the world?
Yeah, so actually only 40% of our wine comes to the U.S. 30% is in Europe. We have fantastic distributors in Austria, in Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Ireland, the UK, and we also have really good market in Japan. Japan's a great Burgundy market.
Did you establish that, or did Pierre kind of help you with that? I mean, he's a longstanding guy in the industry.
Yeah, I didn't find the distributor. It was actually a relationship that we have with Diva Beaune that has the connection with Vinorum in Japan. But the Vinorum distributor in Japan is the group that I have worked with now for the last 5 years, and go to Japan every year and do a bunch of wine dinners and tastings there. We've got a fantastic restaurant presence in Tokyo. A lot of Michelin 2- and 3-star restaurants in Tokyo carry our wine.
Yeah, I've seen your trips to Japan on social media, and I know, you know, a business trip to Japan for Mark is Mark eating at every sushi place possible by himself.
That's right. That's right.
Yes, you know, which is
yeah.
I mean, that's how people get to appreciate your wine and your love for food, and is very well known by me. And you know, we have a couple more questions, right?
We got a question actually from a future guest on the Zoom, Arvid, and Arvid says he loves your wines and the trajectory they seem to be on. And his question is, any dream vineyards you'd like to work with in or out of Burgundy?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that. I only want to stay in Burgundy. I don't want to make wine anywhere else. I think Burgundy has always been my passion. There are so many fantastic parcels in the Côte de Beaune that we would love to have a slice of. I would say the one area that we don't have any that I've worked on and haven't been able to be successful is in Meursault. We have tremendous demand for our white wines. They sell out almost overnight, and so we're very desperate to have more whites. And so if I could have a parcel of Meursault somewhere along the line, that would be a real dream. And by the way, I should just add the sort of caveat, a dream that would be somewhat realistic. Again, given how crazy the prices are, and Meursault prices are very, very expensive as well. At least the idea of a Meursault is somewhat something we could imagine, but some of the other parcels are just darn near impossible.
Another question that we just received is regarding aging your wines. How long do you recommend holding onto your Volnays before opening them? This person is looking at opening perhaps the 2012 Clos de la Chapelle this weekend.
Okay, yeah, that's another good question. So a lot of it is vintage dependent. Some of the vintages are much friendlier early on. For example, 2015 is a vintage that I wouldn't open now and wouldn't open for another 5 years. I mean, it's got a lot of structure and tannin. The other comment I would make is that red Burgundy, particularly in the Côte de Beaune in general, will drink very well young, like the first year when you open it up. They're terrific, but then after the first year, you really need to kind of let them lay down for a much longer period of time. So they lose their baby fat, as we say. But with respect to the 2012, that's a vintage that we lost 80% of the crop. So very, very tiny production, very concentrated wine. It is a wine that shows extremely well right now. I had a Clos de la Chapelle 2012 just a couple of months ago. I think it's very expressive, but it's also a very concentrated wine. And there would be no problem aging that another 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. But it's a wine that has come into its own and is definitely enjoyable now.
Great. John, do you have any opinions on that?
I was reading the chat for a second, so I thought, I have another question here about being to the Cave Madeleine restaurant in Beaune, the best dang meal ever had. My friend, we should bring Frank on. Bring Frank on. He's asking some good questions. Let Frank. Welcome, Frank. How are you?
He's on.
Hi. Oh, I don't know if my audio's on.
Yep, you're good.
It is.
Oh, okay.
You look like you have a beautiful. Are you in Napa Valley or where are you? You have a beautiful backdrop there.
No, I'm about 8 minutes north of downtown Los Angeles in a little canyon called Glen Oaks Canyon.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah, Glendale in the house.
Thank you.
Well, actually, I'm just, I don't know, green or red with envy because I'm remembering Beaune and the wines that were affordable there but aren't affordable here, and reminiscing about Cave Madeleine. Have you been to that restaurant? Because honestly, I think that's about the best meal I've ever had in my whole life.
Yeah, I've been there many times. Yeah, my gosh, that place is amazing. Yes, it's one of my go-to places when I'm in Burgundy.
It was pretty marvelous. It was all, I think it was mostly chefs sitting around that all knew each other, enjoying their wine. And that's where I learned how, the people who really know wine, and I'm a neophyte, I'm a novice at this, but I noticed around the table, they were talking, and they would stick their nose in the wine before they would take a sip. And that's the first time I saw that. As an American, that's the first time I saw that behavior. And it was second nature. It wasn't something they were doing pretentiously or consciously. It was just what you do. There was about 3 seconds of the nose in the glass before they even considered taking a sip.
Frank, don't forget, I got to give you the, one of the things you got to do with the nose in the glass, and this is one of my favorite things to share with people. And I'm glad you said that because, I have to give credit to my friend Richard Uhlin in Sweden, one of the #1 critic of champagne in the world. So he said, a lot of people, they smell, right? They stick it right in, straight in the center, right? But if you roll it, you got to roll it. It's like the difference between stereo. And if you practice that and if you try it, I swear to God, you will get so much more out of the aromatics. So all of you, it is it took me a while to you have to train yourself to do it. You got to train yourself to roll it in the nose.
I love that mono stereo analogy. That's brilliant. I get it.
Yeah.
Does it work with a $13 Côte de Beaune? Let's find out.
Only if you hold your nose first. No, I'm kidding. It works with anything.
Yeah, I learned from winemakers in Australia the technique of holding the edge of the glass on your nose and closing one nostril with the edge of the glass and smelling with one nostril and then moving it over to the other as a way to kind of get that sort of stereo effect.
Wow.
Is that
that's cool as hell. I love it.
Is that like an Austrian army salute or something with the one,
Yeah, it's the Australian army, mate.
Wow. Well, I haven't heard the one nostril thing, but that's.
But you go one nostril to one nostril to the next, and you use the edge of the glass.
Right. You have to roll.
You just breathe in continuously while you're doing it, and it gives you that sort of. It gives you a left channel, right channel.
No, I've got the wrong glass. I've got a Chardonnay glass, I guess.
Right. Well, thank you, Frank. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you from California. Looking good out there. Looking a lot nicer than most places. And we hope to see you next week as well. Thank you. And what we have, all right, the Madeleine, yes. But I think we have to get ready, right, for our session on Instagram Live. We have a great selection of Mark's wines. And just for tonight, anybody on Zoom, just mention Zoom. We'll give you 10% off tomorrow. If you want to buy any of his wines, we don't usually do that. But, for Mark and for all you guys, we have a great selection of his wines. And they're already cheap. They don't need another 10% off. But just for tuning in and coming, I want to say thank you. And try his wines. You can talk to Lily, about it. We have, what's your email address, Lily?
We're not doing that again. But please, if you respond to the Zoom, there's a link there where you can buy the wines and we'll figure it out for you. I'll put my email in the chat and you can find it there.
Right. And Mark, thank you so much. Always great.
Happy to do it.
Whether, usually I see you at the dinner table, but you look good on the internet too, Thank you for coming and sharing your wines with us. And we're going to be on Instagram Live in 10 minutes. We're going to give everybody a little time to freshen up. But if you do the Instagram thing, check out Acker Wines on Instagram or Clos Chapelle. Clos La Chapelle or Clos Chapelle? What's the
Clos Chapelle.
Clos
Chapelle on the
At
Instagram.
Clos Chapelle. Yep. Right. At Clos Chapelle.
Right. So we'll see you
Great.
there in 10 minutes. And thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
All right,
Okay,
John,
see
take
you.
care.
Great. Thank you.